Caitlin Clark just pulled off something that almost never happens in sports anymore. Not a highlight. Not a buzzer beater. Something bigger. The kind of thing that changes how people spend money, what brands chase, and who suddenly feels nervous in their own league. Because whether people want to admit it or not, there are only a few athletes in history who don't just play the game. They become the game. You've seen it before. A single name turns regular season nights into must-watch events. Arenas don't just fill up, tickets disappear. Casual fans who never cared suddenly have opinions. And the sport starts moving around that person like gravity. Michael Jordan did that. Not just with championships, but with culture. He didn't need a trailer, a storyline, or a marketing trick. His presence was enough. You could slap his name on a product and watch it vanish from shelves like it was illegal to keep it in stock. Then you had Tiger Woods, Gretzky, people who made their entire country, or at least a massive chunk of it, look up and go, wait, I actually need to see this. Ratings went up. Sponsorships exploded. And the sport never looked the same again. That's the lane Caitlin Clark is sliding into, and it's happening faster than anyone expected. Here's what makes it so wild. She didn't walk into a league that was already built like that. This isn't the NBA in its golden age. This is a league that's been fighting for attention for years, with players who've been carrying the weight of the whole sport on their backs. And then one rookie shows up, threes from the parking lot, cameras following her everywhere, crowds treating a Tuesday night game like it's the finals, and suddenly the entire conversation changes. Some people are celebrating because they can feel the momentum. But others, you can practically hear the teeth grinding. Because when a new star gets this big this fast, it doesn't just create excitement. It creates a power shift. And once the power shifts, everything gets exposed. Who benefits, who gets ignored, and who's been waiting a long time for a moment like this, only to watch someone else take it. The real shock didn't come from a logo on a jersey or another endorsement announcement. It came from an object so simple that most people almost missed how massive it actually was. A basketball. Wilson, the official game ball supplier for both the NBA and the WNBA, made Caitlin Clark the first female athlete since Michael Jordan to receive her own signature basketball collection. Read that again. Not one of many. Not part of a campaign. The first. Since Jordan. That detail matters because Wilson doesn't hand these out to stars. They reserve them for icons. Players whose influence goes beyond highlights and stat sheets. Players who make kids want to play the game just by holding the ball. And now Clark's name sits in that exact space. These weren't generic gym balls with a logo slapped on them either. Every design told a story. One celebrated her fearless shooting range. Another honored the record she broke before most players even peak. Each one felt intentional. Like Wilson wasn't just betting on her talent, but on her legacy. Then came the part that made executives lean forward and veterans raise eyebrows. The basketballs didn't just sell well. They vanished. Tens of thousands were gone in under an hour. No drawn-out rollout. No heavy promotion. Just demand so intense that supply didn't stand a chance. It felt less like a sports release and more like an iPhone drop or a hype sneaker launch. And that's when the mood shifted. Because once you see a rookie move merchandise like that, the conversation changes. This isn't about potential anymore. This is about leverage. About who brands trust to carry an entire category on their shoulders. And inside a league where many players have been waiting years for that kind of recognition, watching one person cross that line first didn't sit right with everyone. Just when people thought the Wilson moment was the peak, Caitlin Clark did something that made absolutely no sense on paper, and somehow worked anyway. She partnered with a grocery store. Not a sneaker giant. Not a luxury brand. A Midwest supermarket chain. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because this wasn't about hype culture or hardcore basketball fans anymore. This was about everyday people. Parents grabbing groceries. Kids walking past an aisle and stopping dead because they recognized the name. And once again, the product didn't sit on shelves. Limited edition Caitlin Clark basketballs started selling out inside stores that had never seen anything like that before. No lines around the block. No viral chaos online. Just steady, undeniable demand from people who normally wouldn't care about sports merchandise at all. That's when it became clear this wasn't just an athlete riding momentum. This was a crossover moment. Clark wasn't living inside basketball culture. She was leaking into normal life. The kind of reach brands spend decades chasing and rarely find. If you're someone who's followed the game for a while, moments like this make you stop and pay attention. This is the point where an athlete stops being popular and starts becoming unavoidable. And if you're already invested in where women's basketball is headed, this is exactly the kind of story you don't want to miss as it keeps unfolding. Because while fans were celebrating something this big finally happening, inside the league, the reaction wasn't nearly as unified. What fans saw as a breakthrough moment, not everyone inside the league experienced the same way. Because when one player becomes the center of attention this fast, it changes the temperature in every locker room she walks into. Conversations shift. Energy shifts. And suddenly, things that used to be quiet start leaking out in side comments, looks, and accidental moments on the court. Some veterans tried to downplay it. Others stayed silent. A few couldn't help themselves and let frustration slip through cryptic posts, interviews that felt a little too pointed, or plays that carried just a bit more force than necessary. And here's the uncomfortable part. This reaction isn't rare. It happens in every sport when a new face arrives and gets what others spent years chasing. Not because the new player did anything wrong, but because timing isn't fair. Imagine grinding through seasons where charter flights weren't guaranteed, marketing was minimal, and national attention felt like a luxury. Then a rookie steps in, cameras already waiting, brands already calling, arenas already sold out. Even if you respect the talent, that comparison messes with people. But the truth is, Caitlin Clark didn't skip the work. She didn't shortcut the process. She showed up with a game that forced the world to look. And that's the part no one can argue with. Still, success like this has a side effect. It doesn't just lift someone up, it exposes what the system wasn't doing before. And once that contrast is visible, it's impossible to ignore. Because now the question inside the league isn't whether Clark is good enough. It's why the spotlight feels so different now, and what that says about everything that came before. At a certain point, opinions stop mattering. Feelings stop mattering. Even narratives stop mattering. Because numbers don't care who's uncomfortable. Once Caitlin Clark stepped into the league, the ratings told a story no debate show could spin. Her games weren't just outperforming expectations, they were tripling the league average. Regular season matchups suddenly looked like marquee events. Networks adjusted schedules. Broadcasters leaned in instead of filling time. That kind of jump doesn't happen by accident. Millions of people who hadn't watched a single WNBA game the year before were now tuning in on purpose. Not out of obligation. Not out of curiosity. Because they wanted to see what would happen next. And when you follow the numbers beyond TV screens, the picture gets even clearer. Arenas filled up. Secondary ticket prices climbed. Social clips hit timelines far outside basketball circles. Clark wasn't borrowing attention from the league. She was bringing in a brand new audience. What made it even more uncomfortable was the contrast. Her rookie salary barely scratched what fans assumed a star of her level would earn. Meanwhile, endorsement money surged into a completely different stratosphere. The gap between what she was paid on paper and what she generated in value became impossible to explain away. That gap didn't just spotlight Caitlin Clark. It spotlighted the league. And suddenly, conversations that had been pushed aside for years, marketing, revenue, visibility, investment, were front and center. Not because someone complained loudly, but because the success made the questions unavoidable. Whether people liked it or not, the message was clear. This wasn't hype. This was proof. For a long time, one voice was missing from the conversation. And his silence almost made it louder. Michael Jordan doesn't comment on trends. He doesn't jump into debates. When he speaks, it's usually after the story has already written itself. So when his name finally entered the Caitlin Clark discussion, it changed the weight of everything. This wasn't a throwaway compliment or a polite nod. Jordan spoke about her impact, about what it means to see young players dribbling with a Caitlin Clark basketball, the same way kids once copied his moves in driveways and school gyms. That comparison alone carried more meaning than a dozen hot takes. Because Jordan understands something most people don't. He knows what it feels like to arrive in a league that wasn't ready for what you were about to become. He knows what it's like to pull attention, money, and expectations in your direction, and to feel the resistance that comes with it. When he said the league should appreciate what Clark is doing, it wasn't advice. It was a warning wrapped in respect. Coming from the person who turned basketball into a global machine, that message hit differently. In that moment, the conversation stopped being about whether Caitlin Clark belonged in the spotlight. It became about whether the league was ready to grow at the speed she was forcing it to. What finally pushed this from impressive to historic wasn't an opinion, a headline, or even an endorsement. It was a stat. A rare one. The kind that doesn't show up unless something truly unusual is happening. Caitlin Clark and Michael Jordan now share a rookie playoff benchmark that no one else in NBA or WNBA history has touched. Points, assists, rebounds, steals, blocks, all at elite levels, all in the postseason, all as rookies. That's not a coincidence. And it's not a reach. This is the part where comparisons usually fall apart, but this one holds because it's rooted in production, not hype. Clark isn't chasing Jordan's shadow. She's standing beside him in a category that measures all-around impact under pressure. And that matters, because playoffs are where influence gets tested, where defenses adjust, where physical play ramps up, where stars either shrink or separate themselves. Clark didn't just survive that environment, she controlled it. For fans, it confirmed what their eyes had been telling them all season. For critics, it quietly closed the door on a lot of arguments. And for the league, it signaled something even bigger. This wasn't a hot start. This was a foundation. A foundation strong enough to carry an era, whether everyone is ready for it or not. By this point, the conversation around Caitlin Clark isn't really about her anymore. It's about what happens to a league when one player accelerates growth faster than the system was designed to handle. Because Clark isn't easing the WNBA into a new phase. She's dragging it forward in real time, with cameras, sponsors, and fans moving at her pace whether leadership is comfortable or not. That kind of acceleration exposes everything. Pay structures that no longer make sense. Marketing strategies that suddenly look outdated. And long-standing habits that worked when attention was scarce but don't hold up when the spotlight is this bright. For younger players and kids watching from home, Clark represents possibility. Proof that women's basketball can command the same excitement, loyalty, and mainstream pull as any other sport. For brands, she's a blueprint. For networks, she's a ratings engine. But for the league itself, she's a stress test. Moments like this don't come often. When they do, leagues either adapt and grow, or they stall while the opportunity passes them by. The uncomfortable truth is that resistance doesn't slow the change. It just decides who benefits from it. Caitlin Clark didn't create this moment. She revealed it. And now the WNBA stands at a crossroads. Embrace the shift and build around it, or keep debating it while the rest of the sports world moves on. Because whether anyone likes it or not, the era has already started. And it's not waiting. Caitlin Clark's rise isn't a fairy tale. And it isn't a fluke. It's what happens when timing, talent, and opportunity collide in a way the system didn't fully prepare for. She didn't ask to become the center of gravity in women's basketball. She just played the game in a way that made it unavoidable. That's why this moment feels bigger than one player. It's about a league being forced to confront its own limits. For years, the question was whether women's basketball could draw mainstream attention. Now the question is how the league handles it once it finally arrives. History shows that when a sport gets a figure like this, everything changes. The money grows. The audience expands. The expectations rise. And the players who benefit most are the ones who adapt instead of resist. Caitlin Clark is still early in her journey. The numbers will change. The narratives will shift. The pressure will only increase. But one thing is already clear. The attention isn't going away, and neither is the impact. This isn't the end of the story. It's the opening chapter of a new era, and the decisions made right now will shape women's basketball for decades. And if you've been watching this unfold and forming your own opinion, now's the time to jump into the conversation. Drop your thoughts in the comments, let everyone know where you stand, and if you want to stay locked in as this era continues to unfold, make sure you like the video and subscribe. Because stories like this don't slow down, they only get bigger.